I'm Derek.
I'm Tilden.
And today we're going to be installing our cab mount relocation kit on this 3rd gen Tacoma.
One of the first steps we do is pull the kick panel, pull this little running board plastic piece, peel the carpet back. You have to unscrew a foam piece and pull on it at the same time to access the cab mount bolt. Just finished up the driver's side, moving over to the passenger side. Pretty much the same thing, just a little easier. You don't have the foam pad to remove.
Now that we got the interior all taken apart, we're gonna go ahead and pull the truck into the shop and get moving on the rest of the install. I'm happy this truck doesn't have rock sliders. That's a note. If you have rock sliders, installing these is a little more difficult. It can be done, it's just a little bit harder.
Oh, yeah, you're good to go up with it.
The next thing we're gonna do is take off these 10mm screws all throughout the inner fender, fender flare. There is one underneath here you also have to take off. After we pop this guy off, we're gonna just pull the fender back. And I like to take a rag and just fold it up. Pop this guy off. There's clips under here, so be careful not to break them. And then I'll just throw a rag up under here to kind of push this out of the way while we're working on this area. So now we need to get access to the front core support bolts. If you have a factory front bumper, you'll have to pull your inner fender liner back. There's 1, 2, 3 10mm screws you have to take off, and then this clip just pops off the fender. This is a little clip here. You can pop this off. It sits into the plastic. There we go. Almost forgot. There's a plastic clip up here you also have to take off. Pop that guy out. Save that. Pull this back. You don't need it all the way off, just enough to get access to those bolts. There we go. So now that we have access to the front core support on the passenger side, we're gonna do the same thing to the driver's side and then take the nut off the core support bolts. So now we're gonna loosen the core support bolt. You can do this with one person, it's just a little easier with two. So I'm gonna drop a 14mm wrench in here and get it on the bolt head. I'm good, so then he can start loosening that nut on the bottom. After we get the core support bushings and nuts off, we're going to loosen all of the 10mm screws in the engine bay that are holding the grill, the headlights, all that stuff. Just because we're going to be lifting the body up. And so loosening all these lets everything kind of flex a little bit easier. So we're just setting jacks under the front cross member and the rear diff just to kind of stabilize the truck on the lift. If you're doing this in your garage floor or in your garage with jack stands and a floor jack, it is possible. I've done a ton of them. What I would typically do is I take a jack stand here, same thing on the other side, and then I put one in the middle here. And we are going to do both cab mounts at the same time. I would recommend you do one at a time if you're doing this on a shop floor. One thing that I learned was helpful when doing it on the shop floor is I would actually leave the tire on the opposite side that I was working on, and I would put, you know, a piece of wood or whatever spacer, piece of metal I had under that tire with the front of the truck jacked up, so that when I lift the body here, that tire was actually pushing on the ground rather than just lifting the whole body and truck off of the jack stands. We're gonna take these clips out and fold it back just so we get more room to work in this area. This is from Harbor Freight. It's just a panel removal tool. It makes these a lot easier. How it works is these plastic tabs have two sides that press in. So if you can kind of see them pressing in, you want to kind of work it back and forth as you pull out. Sometimes they break, sometimes you get one out like that. So just a better look at this guy here is there's these two tabs that kind of spring load in, and it's pushed into the square hole. So you just want to find what side these two clips, these indent clips are, and use your panel tool or screwdriver, whatever you're using, push these in and then pull it out at the same time. Sometimes they're a little stubborn. If you're watching this before you install, I would recommend getting them some replacements off Amazon. We'll drop the link to those in the description. The ones that didn't have screws in them tend to be a little bit easier, a lot easier. They kind of just fall out. Once you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 clips pulled, you're gonna take the fender liner, pull it back. I like to zip tie it up through this top hole. I'll get it through here first, like that. Pull this up and just zip tie it out of the way for now. Then you're gonna pull this foam piece out of here, just like so, and then set this aside. After we get that pulled out, we're just gonna clean this area, get all the dirt out. I would also recommend popping off this inner, what are they called? I'm blanking on what these are. Splash guard. Take off your splash guard. Wipe all this down. It'll end up getting painted later. So we'll clean it better. I just don't like working with a bunch of dirt. So just to take the splash guard off, you can just take a screwdriver or your panel removal tool, pop these clips out. Last one there, and then we'll just set this aside for now. Before we start cutting anything, we are going to make a mark, a reference point for where our cab mount is currently set. And the way I like to do that, you can do this to the ground too, is measure to the bottom of the pinch weld. So we are at 6 3/8 currently. So I'm just going to write 6 3/8 here, and then we'll do the same thing on the other side. Once we have our base point measurement, we'll actually go ahead and unbolt the cab from the cab mount. Now that we have our base measurement for where the cab is set, we can actually take the factory cab mount bolt off. The top is going to be a 19 millimeter and the bottom is a 17. And then there's only one part to the factory hardware that we're actually going to use, and it's this washer right here. So what we're going to do is take this over to the vise, put it upside down, and hammer this bolt through. You can do this in a vise, or you can take a big socket that fits over the bolt head. It doesn't really matter. Just going to tap that through. Throw this away. There's always a missing lock for one of these. I don't know where it goes. We need a bottom. So the first cut we're gonna do is actually cut the fender, get more clearance. One to work in here and just for tire clearance. You can see it's actually already rubbing here. So what I like to do is I come, see this point right here? The fender liner or the fender flare kind of comes to a meeting point from the bottom to the side. I like to kind of cut about vertical, a little less than vertical, right to that point. Like that. And then now I'll come under here and meet the two. And so after we get the fender cut, then we're gonna come in here and fold the pinch weld down. I like to cut this tab off. Usually I'll make one cut here, and you can kind of see if you look inside here, there's marks where there's pinch welds. You wanna make sure you don't cut through the pinch weld. I usually do 1, 2, 3 cuts, and this line here is where the cab actually meets. You wanna make sure you don't go into that line. Dude, it's a workout. It's been a while.
Since I could stand on my own 2 feet again. That's it.
We're using pole jacks here just because we're on a lift. If you're doing this on your garage floor, you can just use a floor jack and then a piece of wood and just put it up under the cab, and it'll do the same thing.
Going up at like an inch?
Yeah. On 3rd gen Tacomas, you are going to have a wiring harness on the driver's side of the frame. There is a bolt holding the harness down to the frame here. It's a 12 mil. You'll just undo that guy. But you can do it once the cab is down. More so if you forget to put this bolt back in. It's just definitely easier while the cab is up. Cool. Make sure you drop that and lose it. And there are also, after that clip or bolt, there's 3 clips holding this in to the frame here. Just gonna pop those off. Get under it. Pop that one off. Pop that one off, and then the 3rd one is actually on top. Go. And then we're just going to push this over on top of the frame, out of our way for now. So now we're ready to actually cut the factory cab mount off. Before you do that, those black plastic caps you took out on the inside of the cab, you want to make sure you can go and throw those back in, just as a safety precaution to make sure sparks aren't flying back up into the cab. So there are a few different methods you can use to cut the factory cab mount off. Plasma cutter, cutoff wheel and grinder, sawzall. My personal preferred choice is to use a sawzall to get the bulk of the cab mount off. So what I'm going to do is cut the bulk of it off about 2 inches off of the actual frame, and then from there we'll work on how to get the rest of the mount off. So now that we got the bulk of the cab mount off, we're just going to clean this out. Usually there's a bunch of mud kind of caked up in here. Pull all that out. We do still have to finish taking all of this off. So the way I like to do that is starting by the easiest and then working my way to the hardest, and by doing this in 4 sections. So what I'll end up doing is I'll cut all the corners here. This being the easiest, this being the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. So what we're gonna do is cut our corner into here, being careful not to go into the frame up here. And then we're going to gouge this weld line all the way up, and then we'll be able to break it off. So when you're gouging this weld, you want to make sure you're not going all the way through. Really, the main goal is to go a little over halfway through. So I'm just taking light cuts back and forth. I'm not digging into it. And once you get that first piece, once the corners are cut on this first section, you can take a hammer and break a big chunk of it off. Just like that. And then so we are going to do the same thing all the way across. The next one is going to be this. We have to clean that up a little bit more, and then gouge the weld on the bottom, and then cut this corner. Take the channel locks, kind of finish bending it back and forth. These last 2 sections I would say are the most difficult, just because of space. You can do this with a grinder. You just end up not being able to get as close and scoring the welds like you'd like. We're going to use a die grinder so we can get inside of here, but it is doable to do this with just a grinder and a cutoff wheel. so now that we got the bulk of the factory cab mount off, we still need to grind the weld down. There's a lot of different ways you could go about it. A hard disc, which I would definitely not recommend using. Flat disc, a lot of people love these. But what's something a lot of people don't know about are these, and this is called a resin fiber disc. And this is kind of our preferred method for blending flat surfaces. The flap wheel is great for like radiuses and corners and stuff like that, and we'll actually use it to kind of feather some of this out. But these are available on Amazon, Benchmark, Jag 10. There's a lot of different places you can get this. But so it's this rubber backing pad, goes on like this, and then it has this special lock nut that comes with it, if I can get it to go in there. Okay, so we found the right locking nut. So this goes on, the disc goes on like this, and then it just locks into place, kind of like any other disc cutoff wheel. But this is a lot easier to blend smoothly without getting divots and grooves in whatever surface you're trying to blend. So we are starting with a 24 grit resin disc, and that's just to knock this weld down. So we got all the weld ground down, we stepped up to our 80 grit resin fiber disc. Now I like to use a flat disc just to kind of, I'm gonna say feather it out, kind of get these deeper scratches out. So we just finished up with the flat disc, kind of smoothing everything out a little bit more. Now we're gonna hit it with a DA. So we just finished up with our first pass with the DA. We started with a 40 grit DA pad. Now we're gonna go to an 80. This will just help kind of get the fine scratches out from the 40 grit DA pad. So now that we got the frame all prepped and ready for the cab mount, now we can start prepping the cab mount. I'm just gonna do a quick DA over all of the surfaces, and then we will go and mock up the new cab mount on the truck. So now that we have the frame all prepped and ready to go, we can drop the cab. You want to make sure you pull this wiring harness off from the top of the frame before you lower it. You don't want to pinch that. Drop the cab back down to what our initial measurement was. Cool, we're good here. Good over here. So now that we have the cab set back to the correct height, we're going to go ahead and mock up the cab mounts. So your bushings are going to come apart like this. This is going to push through the bottom, and then this will sit on top. In the hardware bag, there are 2 large washers and 2 slightly smaller washers. The larger washers are going to go on top. The smaller of the 2 will end up going inside of the tube here. For mock-up, we include a standard 1/2 inch nut as opposed to using the nylock nuts for final install. So for the bolt, we're going to take this, and then, thank you. You're going to take off that washer we knocked off the factory bolt, drop that through there, drop this through the cab, and then bolt the cab mount up to it. One quick thing to note is if you are installing this on a 4Runner, you will need to drill out the bottom of the cab to 1/2 inch so that the bolt can fall through. If you are installing this on a Tundra, if you look on the frame right here, there will be a small rectangular hole right in the frame where the overlay plate lands. We provide a 1/4 inch plate that gets welded in here. You do blend that, and then the frame overlay plate sits on top of that. So we're going to put this up through here. Try to line this up so the bolt can fall through. Thank you. Again, we're going to use the standard nut that we include with the kit just for mock-up. so. So with that tight, we are going to mock up the frame overlay plate. So this is our frame overlay plate. The main function of this is to just disperse the load over a larger surface area as opposed to just welding the cab mount directly to the frame. It's contoured to the frame. You just slide this under here, like so. Kind of position it centered. So there is a plate that will end up getting welded on the bottom side of this. You want to make sure you have enough room to weld over that. Right about there's pretty good. Make sure it's nice and level. One thing to note is if you are installing this on a second gen Tacoma or a 4Runner, there is generally a large hole in the frame. You will need to offset the frame overlay plate to cover that hole in the frame.
Now we're gonna take the cab mount off the truck to prep it and weld it all out. So now we are going to weld the inside of the cab mount on both of them. And then after that, we'll put the bottom plate on, just like that, and then weld these open corners. Dude, I'm just dropping dimes over here.
So now that we have the cab mount all welded up, we're ready to mock it up onto the truck. Kind of the same thing as before. We're gonna mock up the cab mount. And if I can get that bolt to go through. There we go, thank you. Again, we're gonna use the non-locking nut. That's all good. So that's all set. Usually after you weld it, it might pull the plate a little bit. So you can use a clamp on the ends and get that a little bit tighter. We're less than a 16th off the frame. All this is said with, we haven't touched the cab height since we unbolted it. What we are going to do is now tack the cab mount onto the frame, unbolt it, and then lift the cab again so we can weld the top side of the mount. If you are installing it like us on a lift, you do want to make sure you go ahead and tack both of the cab mounts in at the same time before you raise the lift. Another good note is that plastic cap we took off earlier and then put back in to cover the hole in the floor when we were grinding. It is also a good idea to put that back in while you're welding the cab mount to the frame. Now that we got the cab mounts tacked in place, we're gonna go ahead and raise the cab back up just to give us better access to the top of the mount. You do wanna make sure you remember to push this wiring harness back over the frame. It's very important that you take this back apart, raise the cab again, and not weld it with the bushings in place. You will melt the bushings if you try to leave them in place. Now that we have the cab mount all welded up, while that's cooling, we're gonna go ahead and tape all this. We've already prepped it, cleaned it, and we're gonna paint this area. We've cleaned up this as well as our plastic fender. Let that dry while this is cooling, and then we'll come back and paint the cab mount in the frame. Before you paint this area, if you are using your factory inner fender liners, I like to use a hole here. I'll drill a hole here before I paint all of this so that when everything goes back together, we can punch a hole in our inner fender liner and then hold the fender liner back with a zip tie. Let that set for a minute. So this is the foam that we took out because we trimmed the fender back. This foam nub here sticks past and it doesn't let the fender liner push all the way back. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna cut off this and then also this face here. This is just a drywall knife. You can use a razor blade, hacksaw, anything like that. that. Clean all the loose stuff off. And then we can go ahead and throw this back in the truck. Just like so. You can see that. We're still waiting for the paint to dry on this so that we can put everything else back together, but we'll come back in a minute once this is dry and show you guys how to throw the rest of it back together. The first thing you want to do as far as putting it back together is move that wiring harness back over the frame and then bolt it back down up on top right here. So now that we're ready to put everything back together, we're gonna put the bushing in through the bottom. It's really important that this sleeve is located properly. And then we're gonna drop this on top. The larger of the two washers goes on top, and now we're gonna drop the cab down and then push the bolt through. Now that we have the cab lowered back down, we're gonna take the smaller of the two large washers, put that on first, one of the 1/2-inch washers, and then the nylock. We're just gonna run it down with an impact first, and then we're gonna torque it to 90 foot-pounds. That's good. And then we're gonna move on and do the same thing to the other side. So now that we have the cab mount all put back together, we're gonna start putting the fender and inner fender liner back together. Since we cut the fender, what I'm gonna do is kind of mock this up back where it would go. Give a look at kind of where it needs to push back. So I'm gonna cut here back into this back corner. Like that. And then pop a hole in this corner here. And then we're gonna go up through here, down through that hole that we drilled in the fender. Pull this guy back. Just like that. There's these blue and orange clips behind the fender flare. Sometimes when you pull the fender flare off, they're in a slotted hole, so you might need to readjust those so that it clicks back in place. We already went ahead and put all the plastic clips back in, holding the inner fender liner in, and then now we're gonna put back the 10mm screws that held the fender flare on. Before we put this back together, we do need to go back and tighten the core support back down. Now that we have the core support tightened down, Tilden's gonna go back and put the rest of the inner fender liners back together, and then I'm gonna go through, tighten up all the 10mm bolts in the engine bay. So we've got all the 10mm bolts in the engine bay tightened up. Tilden has the wheels put on, he's torquing them down right now. We can go ahead and put the battery back on. As far as exterior wise, that's everything that's done. The very last step would be to put all of your interior pieces back together. And that's pretty much the same way everything came apart.